Good evening, students. This is Saraswati KB, Associate Professor, Government First Aid College, Tiptur. In the third session of this paper, Romanticism, prescribed for third semester, optional English, we will learn about the influences of scientific thoughts and industrial revolution on the literature of England during the 18th century. Industrial revolution in modern history is the process of change from an agrarian and handicraft economy to one dominated by industry and machine manufacturing. These technological changes introduced novel ways of working and living and fundamentally transformed the society. 18th century is also termed as the Age of Reason. The history of science during this age of enlightenment traces developments in science and technology during the Age of Reason. The period spans after the French Revolution, that is from 1789, and the Napoleonic era up to 1815. The scientific revolution saw the creation of the first scientific societies, the rise of Copernicanism, and the displacement of Aristotelian natural philosophy and Galen's ancient medical doctrine. By the 18th century, scientific authority began to displace religious authority, and the disciplines of alchemy and astrology lost scientific credibility. 18th century is also termed as the Age of Enlightenment. Many Enlightenment writers and thinkers had backgrounds in the sciences and associated scientific advancement with the overthrow of religion and traditional authority in favor of the development of free speech and thought. Broadly speaking, Enlightenment science greatly valued empiricism and rational thought, and was embedded with the Enlightenment ideal of advancement and progress. As with most Enlightenment views, the benefits of science were not seen universally. Jean-Jacques Rousseau criticized the sciences for distancing man from nature and not operating to make people happier. Another significant point of this age is popularization of science. During Enlightenment, science was dominated by scientific societies and academics, which led to popularization of science among an increasingly literate population. The century saw scientific advancements in the practice of medicine, mathematics, and physics, the development of biological taxonomy, new understanding of magnetism and electricity, and the maturation of chemistry as a discipline which established the foundations of modern chemistry. 18th century saw an increasingly literate population seeking knowledge and education in both the arts and the sciences. They drove the expansion of print culture and the dissemination of scientific learning. The new literate population was due to the high rise in the availability of food. This enabled many people to rise out of poverty, and instead of paying more for food, they had money for education. Popularization was generally part of an overarching Enlightenment ideal that endeavored to make information available to greatest number of people. 18th century saw the establishment of coffee houses, a new public forum for political, philosophical, and scientific discourse. In the mid 16th century, coffee houses popped up around Oxford, where the academic community began to capitalize on the unregulated conversation that the coffee house allowed. The new social space began to be used as a place to discuss science and experiments outside the laboratory of the official institution. The influence of science also began appearing more commonly in poetry and literature during the Enlightenment age. Some poetry became infused with scientific metaphor and imagery, while other poems were written directly about scientific topics. Many poets like Richard Blackmore, James Thomson wrote on the legacy of Newton and his like. During the Enlightenment era, women were excluded from scientific societies, universities, and learned professions. Women were educated, if at all, through self study, tutors, and by the teachings of more open minded fathers. With the exception of daughters of craftsmen who sometimes learned their father's profession by assisting in the workshop, learned women were primarily part of elite society. Despite these limitations, there was support for women in the sciences among some men, and many made valuable contributions to science during the 18th century. A negative view of women in the sciences reflected the sentiment apparent in some Enlightenment texts that women need not nor ought to be educated. The opinion is exemplified by Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his work Emily. Quote, "A woman's education must be planned in relation to man, to be pleasing in his sight, to win his respect and love, to train him in childhood, to tend him in manhood, to counsel and console, to make his life pleasant and happy. These are the duties of woman for all time, and this is what she should be taught while she is young." Unquote. All these scientific advancements resulted in an industrial revolution, which in turn impacted the literature of the period. The technological and economic aspects of the Industrial Revolution brought about significant socio-cultural changes. In its initial stages, it seemed to deepen laborers' poverty and misery. Their employment and subsistence became dependent on costly means of production that few people could afford to own. Job security was lacking. Workers were frequently displaced by technological improvements, and a large labor pool was unemployed. Lack of worker protections and regulations meant long work hours for miserable wages, living in unsanitary tenements, and exploitation and abuse in the workplace. But even as the problems arose, so too did new ideas that aimed to address them. These ideas pushed innovations and regulations that provided people with more material conveniences while also enabling them to produce more, travel faster, and communicate more rapidly. The cultural transformations of the broad order were like this. Workers acquired new and distinctive skills, and their relation to their task shifted. Instead of being craftsmen working with hand tools, they became machine operators subject to factory discipline. Finally, there was a psychological change. Confidence in the ability to use resources and to master nature was heightened. The impact of industrial revolution and advancement in science and technology was phenomenal. Romantic literature reflected the impact of science and technology as reflected in human psyche and society through various creative endeavors. Okay students, in this session of the video, I have in detail explained to you the impact of scientific advancements resulting in industrial revolution in England and its impact in turn on the human psyche societies, which was reflected in the literature of that period. Thank you for watching the video.